Some of the nice thing about these heavy hunters like this and knives that are, you know, a little bit bigger than your traditional bushcraft knife is we can still tension cut, right? But we now can give a few little light wrist chops, and we can make this happen, okay? Very quick, very easy to do. And I tend to like a lot of these knives like this because they have power behind them. And usually, you know, they're created with hunting in mind, but because of that, they usually index well. And they work well if you're in the guts of an animal, meaning your hands are wet. The handle could be sticky, grimy, with stuff, cold, all sorts of different things. And we have a nice, you know, nice maple sapling here to work with. This here tends to be one of the cuts that I like to use when I'm doing something like this, and I can cut behind me, just like that. No danger of hitting myself because it's all behind me, and we're at the most powerful part of the swing, which is when the momentum's taking it all the way to the end. Much like a baseball bat, the end of the swing is going to knock the ball out of the park. So I've demonstrated that there. It does quite well with that. Now, I will say it doesn't do as well as maybe some others, and that's because we have this sort of Scandinavian grind here. So once we get about half an inch away from the cutting edge towards the spine of the knife, we're reaching full stock thickness. And this knife isn't exactly what I would call a really thick knife, but it's thick enough to notice that when I'm doing these chops that I'll get hung up a bit. Oddly enough, a knife like the Buck 119 is hollow ground, doesn't seem to have as much issue, even though the stock thickness is a little bit thicker. This knife, however, does feel great, and having that bulbous pommel like this in that hand swell, you can get a good grip on the back of the knife to really get a good swing. I always like to be honest with any of my reviews. We just do a few chest lever grips. So a lot of times I like to work with hardwood, and a lot of times I like to test my knives out on hardwood in terms of carving and handle comfort, that is. Because if you're working with very soft woods, it may take you 45 minutes, we'll say, for your hand to fatigue, or where you may be reaching any hot spots. If you're working with hardwood, carving it, doing these different things, you basically can replicate what would happen over a long period of time with softwood in a very short period of time. Usually within 10 minutes or so of using the knife, because you're exerting much more force, you're going to know, does this fatigue my hand? Is there any spots that are creating, any difficulty in my hand? Some of this a little bit with this sort of pommel here can sort of dig in to the base of the hand. Very powerful knife, though. Very powerful knife. As you can see, we just try some push cuts like this. We just put a point, simple point on the stick. Any of you who've used Scandinavian ground knives know that this is exactly where they excel. This knife here on this whole series is going to be a no-brainer in terms of can it perform bushcraft tasks. Like I said, a little bit of discomfort here at times with that pommel in the chest lever grip. Nothing really to write home about, nothing too serious, but it may be serious for another user. Let me just peel a stick here just a little bit. Now, working with, hardwoods of this size, you can build, actually a substantial shelter for yourself. Even though this is a smaller sapling, being that it's hard maple, it's got a lot of strength there, right? We'll just do this and we'll work our way around this here a little bit. We'll simulate as though we're going to make a tent peg. And by leaving this little portion here on there, it negates the need to make a notch in that, in the stick to hold your line. So we just sort of chamfer that off just a little bit, so it's something that could be pounded in. Okay. So let's try this again. But this time, we'll put in a notch. And as I stated before, I usually like to make the point on my peg at the end of the process of making the tent peg, because it's just another point to have to worry about other than the point on your knife. Quite comfortable. It is a quite comfortable knife in the fact that it's not very fatiguing in the hand. Some knives, as you may know, after using them for a bit, you almost have to pry your hand back open again when you want to set the knife down, because your hand is just so locked in there. And we just sort of chamfer that a little bit so it doesn't split out during the pounding process. And so now we'll put in our stop cut. A little bit of chest lever grip with some thumb support. Or even if you're tent camping, but you bring some tarps, it's going to be rainy and you don't want to be confined to just your tent, and you want to make a decent tarp setup where you can be outside of your tent with a small fire to cook or to read or to just whittle on some wood. You may want to make tent pegs, even though you may have ones that came with your tent. Regardless, it could still be fun, and it gives you a lot of different options and configurations to use with a tent by bringing a tarp or two and crafting your tent pegs and ridge poles out there on site. So we've got our little notch here, and I'll just push cut this. All right, and we don't want to usually make them too pointed because it just will split out as you pound it into the soil. So there's a nice little, hard maple tent peg. Of course, we can fire harden it and all that stuff, and I probably could dress this up a little bit more, especially if you're using it on a longer trip where you're going to travel some and set up again the next night in a different location. And you don't want to have to keep making these wherever you go. Great thing about it is you leave it there and it returns itself back to nature. So, as you can see, it functions quite well. It's very good. The sheath is actually quite nice. It doesn't quite feel like you have anything on your belt. It has a plastic insert in there, which is nice. You know, you don't have to worry about this knife, you know, poking through this leather sheath one bit. The downside of it is sometimes that can happen. Nothing too extreme, though. I mean, perhaps, you know, running or doing some intense sort of climbing out of a ravine, there might be a slight little rattle there from the plastic insert. I'm sure you could remove it. I'm not going to. The knife does retain itself quite well.